Welcome to Crimson Clues, where shadows hide secrets and silence reveals the truth. Every story is a puzzle, and every clue takes you closer to the answer. Subscribe now, join the hunt, and let the mystery begin. Chapter 1. Palms and Promises. To a moderately wealthy Englishman with conservative blood pressure, Florida in season is a delightful affront. It is a place that, after wearing white flannel to breakfast, rejects anything as drab as common sense for the rest of the day. Hotels are as pink as frosted pastries. Pools appear to be spilled directly from the sky. Palms behave in an insulative manner. Even the Atlantic appears to be newly varnished. I accompanied my buddy Hercule Poirot to the breakers at Palm Beach, where I discovered this haven of well-kept sin. The hotel, opulent and complacent, has lately risen from fire, with the tranquil confidence of a rich who has met an architect and liked what he heard. Mrs. Abigail Van Dorn, a wealthy American widow with a humanitarian interest in famous Belgians, invited us. She met us in the lobby, among the hum of ceiling fans and the quiet tinkling of money-changing costumes. "My dears," she cried as the bracelets applauded themselves, "Palm Beach requires a small order, and nobody imports orders like me, Pooh." She also softened her voice, causing even the orchids to lean in. "The stories one hears, if there is a single misplaced cufflink on this island, I want it found by an expert." Poe bowed. "Madame is overly pleasant, where there is minimal disarray. Hercule Poirot's presence does not last long." "Come," said Mrs. Van Dorn, "you'll meet the birthday boy." We followed her through carpets thick enough to bury a scandal, and out onto a loggia, where the Atlantic was practicing for its evening performance. A dinner dance would commemorate Mr. Richard Hone, a 45-year-old Englishman who appeared to have turned pineapple in his youth and invested in his maturity. Palm Beach accepted him as one of its own, tolerating him warmly, but developing a desire for his secrets. He stood at the terrace rail, smiling with admirers and holding a cigar as if it had a speaking part. He was compact, well-groomed, and as crisp as a freshly printed banknote. However, there was a shadow in the corner of his mouth that did not correspond to a birth date. "Mr. Hone," said Mrs. Van Dorn, "permit me to present Monsieur Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings." Hone's smile faltered to the same degree that Poirot's moustaches frequently extract from the stoutest sinner. "Delighted," he exclaimed. "Your reputation precedes you, Mr. Poirot. If you discover a mystery here, please return it to the superintendent." "We're overstocked." "Men," replied Poirot, "the puzzles are like the orchids. Someone does not return them. One cultivates." Hone laughed. "You will find orchids in plenty tonight. Abigail has blanketed the ballroom with them. If we survive the aroma, we will live indefinitely." "Where is Lady Clarissa?" inquired Mrs. Van Dorn. "She promised them emeralds." Hone remarked carelessly, "I'm late as usual." "She believes that a lady should be the final word in punctuality, arriving after everyone else." I had, of course, heard of Lady Clarissa Mordaunt. When given an English title and an American moon, the newspapers do not hold back. She was described as lovely, extravagantly modern, and possessing that peace that comes only after burying a husband and discovering that the world continues to circle. A ripple of laughter moved behind us, and the lady drifted in like a ship with too much sail. She wore emeralds curled around her neck. Her eyes were a cunning grey that seemed blue when appreciated. "Richard, you are odious to begin without me," she whispered, resting a touch on his arm for a heartbeat longer than absolutely necessary. "Mrs. Van Dorn, you are my benefactors. I miss your Pooh. What a delight to find excellence that fits easily in an armchair." Poirot bowed again. "Madame is overly gracious." If the goddess had arrived, an angel appeared to disturb her. Miss Evelyn Hart was introduced by Mrs. Van Dorn with the subtlety of an experienced diplomat. Evelyn possessed the beauty that appears simple, yet is quite expensive to obtain. Evelyn shined where Clarissa glittered. Her robe was pale, her jaw firm, and her fleeting glance at Lady Clarissa might have pinned an insect to a card. "How do you do?" she asked us and Hone, her tone sweet but not submissive. "You owe me a foxtrot, and I am vigilant in such matters." "2 waltzes and a foxtrot," Hone remarked, smiling. "3, Evelyn said, with the air of a treasurer balancing books. Lady Clarissa whispered, "Arithmetic at a party. How healthful." Even I, who am sometimes unfairly accused of obtuseness, recognized the geometry of the situation. Hone's gaze moved to Clarissa like it does to a stage. but it lingered on Evelyn as a man does with the prospect of returning home. Mr. Julian Sinclair, the Home Secretary, lingered on the fringe, a sleek fellow with the smooth surface of a pond and the depth to drown in. Mr. Charles Chick Weatherford, a Wall Street meteorological event in human form, lurked nearby like thunder that had learned to tip servers. The ballroom is prepared as toned by a major domo, whose shoes are hierarchical. Prepared. The air smelled of orchids and expectation. Lights dripped from the ceiling. The band, with wonderful impertinence, commanded everyone to become attractive immediately. There were senators and scoundrels. It's almost impossible to set down a hat without inciting legal action. Poirot dislikes dancing unless he can rearrange the dancers. So he observed instead. Regarding Hastings, he muttered, "There is Monsieur who laughs too loudly. He shares his fear. The stunning widow in emeralds. She treats the other with the delicacy reserved for a rival's hat. And our Mr. Hone adds, subtracts, and cannot agree on his own total." "You astound me," I said. Hone seemed to be thoroughly enjoying himself. "May we?" The delight of nerves. See, when he places the cigar in the ashtray, it does not lie flat. He fusses again. The trivial he arranges while the vital escapes. Any response I could have had was lost with the appearance of Weatherford, who paid court to the hostess, Lady Clarissa, not necessarily in that order, and Evelyn, whom he saluted with the shortness of a man recalling a refusal. Evelyn's response could have frosted a julep. Mr. St. Clair hovered as punctuation, always in place but never invasive. Dinner advanced by siege and courses followed, as it will be by speeches. I would like to note that Hull's statements were graceful and brief. In reality, they were neither. He said too much of friendship and too little of himself, which is worrisome in a man enjoying his own existence. When he finished, everyone in the room danced in relief. I paired with Mrs. Van Dorn, who steered triumphantly, and a lady who claimed remote kinship with the King of Denmark but could not present paperwork. After a moment, I found myself beside Evelyn at a balcony where the sea whispered in the night. "You are Mr. Hull's friend?" she inquired. "Acquaintance?" I made a correction. "We arrived today." "Then you are fortunate," she murmured, pinching her lip as if the word had slipped out in disguise. "Excuse me. I am not good company at birthday parties. You own other people. They make empty promises." She paused. A person shifted the air in the doorway. Lady Clarissa remained utterly calm, knowing that the world would move aside. "My beloved," said Clarissa, "Mr. Weatherford has created a cocktail in your honor. It's called the Innocent. Please come and define the term." "I prefer lemonade," Evelyn answered. "Lemonade is for children and penitent bishops," Clarissa said, slipping away with an expression that suggested a loud talk somewhere else. Evelyn's palm tightened on the balustrade. "No ring," I noticed. "No promise." After a moment she laughed, albeit not cheerfully. "Do you understand what I want, Captain Hastings? A place where the ocean is the only society." "England," I suggested. On Sundays she grinned in spite of herself. "On Sundays, then." And she was gone before I could think of myself as courageous. Looking for Poirot, I found him in a low-key conversation with Mr. Alderman, the hotel manager, a slick, perspiring man who was mostly full of apologies. Mr. Alderman Poirot said, "Only a little precaution. Mr. Hone's apartment contains gifts. Please count them and confirm that none are gone." "Of course," said Alderman, who had pledged to restrain the Atlantic if requested. "We are really careful." And a key to Mr. Hull's suite. Alderman stated that the master key is only accessible to himself and the night superintendent. "We have amazing servants, l'excellent domestique," muttered Poirot. "They keep the world together. What are you about?" I demanded after Alderman had bowed himself away. Poirot also mentioned Riandu in a gentle manner. I admire efficient organization. At midnight, a Scotsman misunderstood the calendar and insisted on the old lang sign. By one could the orchids possess the tired honesty of flowers who have given their all. Hone, flushed and gracious, gave a final tour. He murmured something to Lady Clarissa that caused a toothy smile. To Evelyn, the statement softened her eyes while leaving them solemn. St. Clair hovered. Weatherford drank. Mrs. Van Dorn signed cheques with generous abandon. When we finally retired, the corridor was a fragrant avenue of exhaustion. As he passed Owen's door, Poirot paused to listen. There was laughter. A drink was laid down. A man's voice dropped suddenly, and then there was silence. He murmured, You hear, Hastings? I hear nothing. Just so. It's the quality of silence, Bonui Chapter 2, the morning after. Palm Beach. The mornings are brutally honest. The sea declares itself without shame. The palms talk in the sun, and the hotel staff moves with the firm conviction that another day must be made perfect for those who can afford it. I was in a duel with half a grapefruit and a cup of coffee when the discreet knock arrived. Mr. Alderman, the manager, entered with the air of someone who would gladly have left from his job right away. His face looked pallid and his collar was very tight. He started, "Mr. Poirot, there has been a discovery. Mr. Richard Hone has been discovered in his apartment. The doctor believes it to be." He hesitated, as if the word would stain the wallpaper. "Suicide," murmured Poirot gently. Alderman nodded in appreciation. "Yes, if you could please advise discreetly before the cops arrive." The repute of the breaker. "Reputations, monsieur," murmured Poirot, adjusting his tie, our delicate soulets. "Come, Hastings." We followed Alderman down hushed corridors, the perfume of last night's orchids lingering sickly. Outside Hall's door, a maid wept into her apron, while Julian Slair, the secretary, leaned against the wall with a studied calm. Weatherford raced furiously in the distance, crimson and restless. Lady Clarissa stood immaculately, her expression controlled. Evelyn Hart stood beside her, pallid but firm, hands clenched securely. Poirot's eyes went over them all quickly and cataloguingly before he entered the suite. The room was still filled with the aromas of cigars, flowers, and stale champagne, despite being curtained off from the sun. A scatter of birthday gifts, cigarette cases, packs of sweets, and a silver flask sat on the writing desk, and Richard Hone lay on the bed, still clothed in his evening clothes, but crumpled now. A revolver was casually held in his right hand. A brown stain had grown across his shirt front. Poirot approached the body calmly, as if entering a chapel. He bent down, examined the pistol without touching it, and raised his brow. "An American revolver," he mumbled, settling up very comfortably, probably too comfortably. The young doctor, summoned in a hurry, stood awkwardly by. "Shot through the chest. Death occurred instantly." "No note?" Poirot inquired. "None?" Sinclair asked, a little too hastily. His fingers grasped the back of a chair till the knuckles were visible. Lady Clarissa spoke, her voice firm and almost imperious. Richard was under strain. We all knew it. The marketplaces, the limitless entertainment, and possibly his health as well. "There is nothing mysterious here." Poirot graciously tilted his head and turned to face the desk. It held a decanter of brandy, and 2 glasses beside it. One half drained and the other only touched the rim. A small trace of lipstick was visible in the light. Poirot's eyes twitched, but he said nothing. In the nearby ashtray, 2 types of cigar ends were resting side by side. He pulled open a drawer. It resisted, then slid, revealing stationery invitations and a torn piece of paper. Poirot placed the fragment gently in his pocket. The police arrived with quickness. Inspector Braddock, a sunburned man with a moustache that seemed permanently poised for action. He took a quick glimpse at the body, listened to the doctor's account, and nodded. "Open and close." The gentleman shot himself. "I'll finish the paperwork by lunchtime." Poirot made a faint, uncertain noise. "You are confident, monsieur? Of course these things happen. No controversy if we act promptly." "Perhaps," Poirot said softly. "However, there is no powder mark on the shirt. The revolver is unfamiliar to Mr. Hall's hand, and there are 2 glasses on the desk. Suicidal people do not usually drink in company." Braddock frowned. "You're suggesting murder?" "I don't have any suggestions, Inspector." Poe straightened his moustache, which is all I noticed. The inspector muttered something about foreign cleverness before ordering the corridor cleared. Poirot obeyed with rare docility, and I followed my thoughts in uncertainty. Lady Clarissa was whispering to Weatherford, who was making fast, agitated movements. Evelyn sat apart, face composed and eyes lowered. Mrs. Van Dorn, breathless and scared, arrived last, wringing her hands and promising to pay for every wreath in Palm Beach. Poirot touched my sleeve. "Hastings, you are observant. Each portrays a scenario of anguish, yet each follows a distinct script. It is quite instructive." I shake my head. "Who would want to go home dead? Surely some business rival or mobster." "Not these folks, Poirot." "Abian," whispered Poirot quietly. "The gangster does not cry into orchids, and the rival does not sit outside a closed suite in his evening attire. No, the explanation is right here with them." We must listen and wait. Poirot abruptly came to a stop as we climbed the grand staircase. Hastings, do you recollect yesterday night's silence? The voice was cut off. The glass hit the table and then nothing. Yes, I mentioned that you found it significant. Poirot mumbled, the quality of silence. It persists even now. We entered the breakfast room, where newspapers were already displaying headlines. A social host was found dead at Breakers. Guests pretended to be reading by whispering beneath their coffee cups. So the sun outside poured down indifferently. As if mystery were an English creation unfit for the tropics, Poirot requested a cup of chocolate. We must remain patient, mon ami. There are both loud and quiet details. We'll soon be able to discern between the two. But for now, don't say anything. I obeyed, despite having a lot of questions. It seemed plain to me. Hone committed suicide, possibly as a result of conjecture. But Poirot's eyes spoke a different narrative, and I knew the small guy would eventually gather his strands into a pattern that only he could see. And when he did, I had the unpleasant feeling that the glittering Palm Beach season would not easily regain its footing. Chapter 3, The Ladies Speak. Inspector Braddock, while not a fan of foreigners wearing patent leather shoes, agreed that Poirot could hold a few decent discussions. As a result, we found ourselves seated in a drawing room facing the beach, with summoned witnesses trickling in like performers unsure of their lines. Poirot started with Lady Clarissa Morton. Widowhood provided her with a sense of grandeur, yet her eyes reflected something less majestic. She inclined her head and sat perfectly erect. Lady Clarissa, remarked Poirot with silken elegance save for my sympathies, you were a close friend of Mr. Hone. Her lips formed a slight smile. Close, Miss Poirot, I was amused by him. Richard was an entertaining companion, full of energy and generous in company. Yet friendship with him was like relying on a champagne bottle. One never knew if it might pop or burst. Poirot nodded solemnly. You also spoke with him last night, before we retired. I wish him many happy returns, she remarked. I must admit that he seemed unusually gloomy for the evening's hero. He thanked me sincerely, I thought, for my affection, and added that Palm Beach was not a place for consistency. I'm not sure what he meant by it. Pooh's eyes glittered. And after that, did you go to his suite? She raised her brows. Certainly not. I may be a widow, but I don't want to be a scandal. At 1, I retired to my own room. I do not go around hotel corridors at midnight, Miss Upro. Excuse me, but you admired him. Yes, she drew herself upward. Admiration is not a crime, and if it were, Palm Beach would require a prison as large as the Everglades. Poirot tilted his head. And you had no problems with Mr. Hone? She let out a sudden, piercing laugh. We disagreed once or twice. He mocked me about being a widow who behaved too much like a bride. I told him he was an older bachelor who acted too much like a boy. If it is quarreling, then we did. She rose, pearls sparkling at her throat. Miss Poirot, the reality is straightforward. Richard Hone murdered himself. To suggest otherwise invites melodrama, and I've seen enough theatrical to last a lifetime. She swept out with as practiced a bow as any on stage. I muttered, formidable Poirot, but she seemed genuine enough. Poe simply tapped his fingers together. La Hastings arrive, we must use caution. Miss Evelyn Hart was up next. Evelyn was linen, whereas Clarissa was steel. She wore white, her face pallid, and her hands twisted a handkerchief. She sat without any of Clarissa's poise. Her eyes, however, were calm and steady. Poirot greeted Mademoiselle warmly. I noticed that you are tired, but please, tell us about your last conversation with Mr. Hone, she said hesitantly. We danced twice. He was nice as usual, but disturbed. When we parted ways, he told me I deserved better. Better than him. Better than the crowd we're in. I did not comprehend. Poirot leaned forwards. And then I went directly to my rooms, she stated firmly. I was tired. I didn't see him again. Did you hear about any quarrels, mademoiselle? Maybe they're enemies. Her hands gripped tighter. Richard enjoyed gambling in all aspects of his business. Some men lost money beside him. Mr. Weatherford, for example, argued. I know. But enemies, she said, shaking her head. Richard was extremely popular. He enraged people, but they forgave him. Poe observed her. And you, mademoiselle, did you forgive him too? She appeared startled. For what? For being divided, perhaps? For sharing his attention? A flush appeared on her cheeks. Miss Poirot, I am not blind. Richard paid close attention to Lady Clarissa. He admired her, yet he treated me differently. He expressed his desire to leave Palm Beach and start over. It was all chatter, of course. Her eyes widened quickly. Now it's over, and we may never know what he meant. Poirot's gaze softened. Mademoiselle, you have been honest. That is valuable. She rose, bowed softly, and went away, leaving a faint aroma trail. After she had left, I firmly stated, There, Pooh, you heard her. She's an innocent young woman, terribly impacted. If someone killed Hone, it was not she. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, mon ami, you always jump to the bold conclusion. It might be true or it might not. Remember the innocent expression. It's like the Florida sun. It dazzles, it blinds. We must wear eyewear. Chapter 4, the gentleman responds. The sea crashed far beyond the windows, as if eager to applaud each revelation. Poirot sat calmly, hands clasped, moustaches perfect. With my notebook open, I tried to present myself as a capable chronicler. Charles Chick. Weatherford was presented first. He entered as if the furniture offended him, tugged on his tie and sank into a chair with the grace of a collapsing deck chair. He murmured, Let's get this over with. Poirot tilted his head. Monsieur Weatherford, you were a business acquaintance of Mr. Hone. Weatherford gave a laugh. Acquaintance? Yes, partner, no, Hone was careless. We speculated together. Land, bonds, and everything with a number on it. We sometimes won and sometimes lost. Lately, mostly lost. You quarreled. Of course, we argued. Men with money always quarrel. 2 days ago, he offered me $10,000 in return for a note. He said yesterday that the money had vanished as part of a deal with a friend in New York. Do you blame me for becoming angry? Pooh lifted his eyebrows. Murder, monsieur, is not the same as anger. Weatherford's face turned red. Do you suppose I shot him? I'll admit I threatened to break his nose. What about a bullet? No, that's not my way. Pooh's eyes fluttered. And yet you were observed near his suite after midnight. Weatherford scowled. I had been drinking. I lost my bearings in these interminable passageways. Ask the bellhop who directed me back to my room. I never put a finger on him. Perhaps, Poirot said softly, but you had a cause. Weatherford slammed his fist into the arm of his chair. Yes, there is a reason. Opportunity, perhaps, but guilt? No, I may be hot-headed, but I'm not a murderer. He stood up quickly, shoulders straight, and walked out without waiting for dismissal. I inclined towards Poirot. Motive, opportunity, temper. It must be him, he virtually confessed. Poirot's moustaches twitched. The obvious Hastings is like an American cocktail. It intoxicates quickly but does not endure. Julian Sinclair followed. He approached with controlled serenity, dressed neatly as if for a photograph. He sat easily, one leg crossed and hands resting neatly. Monsieur Sinclair, Poirot began. You were Mr.'s confidential secretary. Sinclair corrected smoothly. I handled his finances, appointments, and occasionally his misbehavior. Poirot saw that you converse with Canandor. I am realistic. Mr. Hall was polite, but his business was disorganized. Without me, his money would have been ruined years ago. Poirot leaned forwards. Nonetheless, you gained. Sinclair's expression flickered. I received compensation, generously. Poirot's voice became sharper. And in his will, were you remembered? Sinclair hesitated and then smiled softly. Mr. Hone advised me repeatedly that loyalty should be rewarded. I'm not sure if he acted on that belief, but he trusted me with paperwork and accounts. He told me things he hadn't told anyone else, like how he worried controversy and how complicated his financial and personal problems were. He just asked me last week what I thought about Palm Beach rumors. I warned him it was as hazardous as any poison. Poirot's eyes glittered. So you were aware of his romantic relationships? Sinclair's smile expanded slightly. Everybody knew. Clarissa enjoyed his company. Evelyn prayed for his promises. It was not my business to advise him beyond the fact that 2 women are more expensive than one. Poole studied him. You're really composed, monsieur. I've seen death before, Sinclair said quietly. It no longer surprises me that I was in France during the war and am now in business. Did you go to his suite last night? Sinclair shakes his head. No, I retired after helping him bring some papers upstairs. I received a telegram from New York, which may serve as my alibi. The night porter noticed me. Yet you have a master key, Poole remarked nonchalantly. Sinclair's expression didn't change. I had access when necessary. But I didn't need it last night. Poirot tilted his head. Mercy, I'm sure that will do. I let out a breath once Sinclair left. Well, Poirot, both guys had their reasons. Weatherford, with his debts and temperament. Sinclair's inheritance is dangling before him. Either could have accomplished it. Poirot tapped his fingertips together. Just so, Hastings. Motives multiply. And when motives are many, one must hunt for what is uncommon. Rare? Poirot nodded. The extraneous detail. The object out of place already exists. I've seen it, but it's not quite ready to speak. I exhaled. At least we can be certain of one thing. It is one of these four. The widow, the engineer, the speculator, or the secretary. The circle is closed. Poe's smile was intriguing. Closed? Yes, but within the circle, who dances with whom? This is what we must learn. Chapter 5, The Net Tightens. That morning, Palm Beach appeared set to continue. The sea sparkled. The band rehearsed for lunch, and parasols dotted the terrace like colorful mushrooms. Only the hushed clusters of people, heads together and eyes darting, revealed that something had intruded into paradise. Poe, on the other hand, was not in the mood for relaxation. He moved around the hotel with the purposefulness of a small tugboat leading a large liner. I followed, wondering where he was going to bring us. Attend Hastings, he advised. We've heard their stories. Now we need to learn the hotel's tale. Buildings talk if you listen, and servants watch. Our first call was to the chambermaid, a terrified creature who had found Hone's body. She wrung her apron as if it were the cause of all misfortune. Poe soothed her gently. Mademoiselle, you cleaned Mr. Holmes' suite yesterday afternoon. Yes, miss, before the party. And you noticed the revolver. Her eyes flew to the nightstand drawer. He showed it to me once and said it belonged to Lady Clarissa, but he kept it for safekeeping. He laughed. He stated that in Florida, one cannot be too cautious when dealing with opponents. Pooh's eyes glittered. So he admitted that the weapon was hers. That is instructive. The maid paused. And forgive, monsieur, but I was in the sitting room last week when Lady Clarissa came to see him. She asked Mr. Hone if he still had her handgun and requested it back. He just chuckled and said she was overly concerned. They were not aware of what I had heard. Poe murmurs with trepidation. And the cigars, mademoiselle, you emptied his ashtray yesterday. Yes, Miss always remains the same. Large, high-quality Havana cigars. But this morning in the tray there were two types, one thick and dark as usual, and another smaller, rougher Florida Imposter. That's the brand that American gentlemen smoke. I've seen Mr. Weatherford with them. Poirot gave a small nod and placed a coin in her hand. She departed with thanks. I murmured. That makes Clarissa look decidedly worse, to Poirot, who was looking for the revolver and Weatherford. He swears he went straight to his room, but his cigar was still burning in Hone's ashtray. Poirot merely grinned. When folks lie about where they walk, it is often to hide what they observed rather than what they did. We briefly returned to Hone's suite. The cops had barricaded the room, but Poirot's fame opened doors that would otherwise have stayed locked. He approached the desk, which still held the brandy decanter and glasses. Observe Hastings, he added, pointing with his gloved finger. The lipstick mark. It's dim, but the color is clear. Last night, who wore it? Miss Hart, I declared confidently. Just so. And she admitted it, but she said she left right after. However, this glass is half empty. Not a hasty sip from a lady, but the slow drinking of someone who stayed. But she told us, and Poirot raised a finger. Exact. She informed us, but the glass says differently. Which is the superior witness? We will see. Poirot's next target was the night porter, Miles, a sharp-eyed fellow who appeared to be missing only sleep. You saw Mr. Hone last night? Poe asked. Yes, sir. About once I'm traveling to his suite with Mr. Sinclair. They carried some papers. After that, I noticed several guests pass across the passageway. Who precisely? The porter scowled with thought. Mr. to Weatherford? Probably staggering a bit, asking for instructions, and Miss Hart not long after. She stated she had misplaced her scarf and would check the ballroom, but she moved towards the suites rather than away. My heart soared. Poe, this completely contradicts her story. Poe silenced me with a glance. And Sinclair, did you see him again? Yes. He informed me that he had a telegram to transmit, but I checked the register this morning. There was no telegram sent at that hour. Poe bowed gravely. Mr. Miles, you are an exceptional observer. You have earned Hercule's gratitude. When we departed, my head was spinning. Phew, this alters everything. Evelyn lied about going right to bed. Sinclair invented the telegraph. Weatherford smoked his cigar with enthusiasm. Clarissa possessed the revolver. They're all guilty at once. Ah, Hastings, Poirot remarked serenely. At last you begin to see the beauty of it. Each has a motive and an opportunity, but there is only one killer. During lunch, Poirot drew aside a waiter, a neat young guy with sharp ears. Monsieur, Poirot asked, what did you hear last night in the ballroom? The waiter hesitated. Mr. Weatherford spoke loudly. He argued with Mr. Hone in the smoking lounge. They demanded money. $10,000. I believe Mr. Hone laughed at him. He said he'd settle it tomorrow or never. Mercy, said Poirot. He returned to me satisfied. So the torn paper 10,000 was indeed Weatherford's responsibility. But the timing, Hastings, to want it on the night of dying. That is more than a coincidence. In the afternoon, we tracked down a bellboy who had carried things upstairs. He was a bright fellow with the air of someone who enjoyed gossiping. Tell me, Matty, replied Poirot, did you deliver anything to Mr. Hone's suite? Yes, sir. A package around 11. He tipped me and then asked me to fetch Mr. St. Clair, saying he needed him right away. Later, at midnight, I noticed Lady Clarissa in the corridor. She seemed upset. She inquired whether Mr. Hone had retired. I told her sure, and she rushed away. Poirot's moustache quivered. So Lady Clarissa was also in the corridor, Pierre. The net tightens. The child smirked, pleased with his importance. Poirot offered him $1 and a benediction. That night we dined in our suite, but Poirot paid little attention to the meal. He had taken over the writing table and displayed his collection of prizes, including the pistol, brandy glasses, cigar stubs, and shredded scrap of paper, each under his fingers like a playing card in some dark game, rather than an object. Regarding Hastings, he murmured softly, "Every piece speaks." Lady Clarissa's handgun remained in Hone's drawer when she demanded its return. The 2 brandy glasses, one of which was marred with lipstick, contradicted Mademoiselle Hart's claim of retiring early. The cigars, 1 good Havana and 1 inexpensive floor tamper, Messiah Weatherford's favorite, claimed he never entered the suite. And the scrap of paper is 10,000. A waitress overheard his quarrel. Finally, Z. Sinclair's telegram, which he claimed provided him with an alibi, did not exist. I massaged my temples. Each of them is lying. But why all at once? They couldn't all be responsible for his death. Poirot leaned back, eyes blazing. Exact, they cannot. But you see, Hastings, they're like actors on stage. Each wears a mask. Each declaims a part. We must determine which performance masks the underlying crime. I tried once more. But what if it was actually suicide? He was burdened by debts shared between 2 ladies. Maybe he'd had enough. Poe shook his head. No, the pistol is in the incorrect hand. The wound sans powder burns. These are not the actions of a man who has taken his own life. Someone was with him. Someone stayed to share the brandy, smoke, and quarrel, and when he refused to yield, the comic turned tragic. He stood and smoothed his moustaches. Tomorrow I will summon them all. In the ballroom, under the lights, everyone will hear what the others have tried to hide. There, mon ami. We will see who cannot bear the silence. Chapter 6. The Orchids of Truth. By dark, the breakers had taken on the solemn majesty of a theatre awaiting its performance. The ballroom, where orchids had drooped the night before, was now again illuminated with dazzling richness. However, there was no gaiety now, only whispers, expectant looks, and the suspense of an audience waiting for the curtains to rise. Inspector Braddock had objected to this foreign charade, but Mrs. Van Dorn, wielding her considerable power, said, "If Monsieur Poirot wishes to speak," she added, "Palm Beach will attend." So they did. We assembled in the vast room. Lady Clarissa Mordaunt appears majestic in black silk. Miss Evil's heart is pale in ivory linen. Charles Weatherford, restless, stuffed his hands into his pockets. Julian Sinclair, pristine as ever, his eyes half closed as if bored with the commotion. Mrs. Van Dorn hovered in the background, alternating between wringing her hands and instructing servants. Inspector Braddock stood stiffly at the hearth, arms folded. Poe stood in the center of the room, very tidy and grave, his moustaches sparkling like bayonets beneath the chandeliers. He bowed. "Madame's Messia, we are here to find out what happened to Monsieur Richard Hone. The cops suspected it was a suicide. I do not. It was murder. And among you is the guilty party. A shiver spread over the room. Evelyn gasped gently. Weatherford mumbled beneath his breath. Clarissa raised her chin defiantly. Poirot stretched his hands. Let us evaluate the facts. I'm sure my own was left-handed. However, the pistol was in his right hand. We can already see the theatre, the scene set for suicide. But that wasn't the same actor. There was no powder burn and no note. Instead, we discover indications of a firm. 2 glasses of brandy, one smeared with lipstick. The tray included 2 cigars, one a Havana, Miss Hone's customary, and the other a Flor to Tampa, Monsieur Weatherford's favorite. Weatherford begun. I said I would never. Be patient, Missy, Poirot advised kindly. You tripped along the corridor, yes? Your cigar has betrayed you. You visited the room briefly, quarreled again, and possibly demanded money, but you did not kill. You left Hone alive and your cigar behind. No, the hand that fired was another's. He turned. Lady Clarissa, the revolver originally belonged to your husband. The maid overheard you asking Richard Hole if he still had it, so you demanded its return. Why so much anxiety? Unless you were afraid of its use. You were observed in the corridor around midnight. A widow's dignity does not always shield her from jealousy. Clarissa rose slightly, flushed cheeks. Are you accusing me? No, madame. You had reason. You had an opportunity, but not the truth. You lent him the pistol. You may have quarreled, but you did not pull the trigger. She dropped back, shaking despite her proud position, and Poirot's gaze shifted to Evelyn Hart. Mademoiselle, you said you retired immediately, but the porter observed you walk down the corridor. Your glass was half empty. You lied. Why? Evelyn's hands twisted in her lap. Because I felt humiliated. I went into his suite. Yes, he told me he wanted to leave Palm Beach and start over. But he spoke frantically, and when I pressed him, he turned frigid. I fled, that's all. Pooh looked at her gravely. You escaped, but not before leaving a mark on the glass. But you too did not kill. Your fear is legitimate. I stared at him, puzzled. But Poirot. If not Weatherford, Clarissa, or Evelyn, then St. Clair must be guilty. All eyes focused on the secretary, who smiled slightly. I'm your Sinclair, Poirot explained. So smooth and calm. You said you retired to send a telegraph. However, the Clair received no such message. Your alibi is fake. You had the master key. You alone may have entered unnoticed. Sinclair raised his shoulders. Monsieur Poirot is quite clever, and certainly I had the resources. But why should I kill the man who paid me generously, and may have intended to include me in his will? Poirot's voice hardened. Because perhaps he didn't. Perhaps you feared being exposed. But no, monsieur, you are not the killer. Your fake telegram. It was to protect others, not yourself. A murmur sounded around the room. I could barely restrain myself. Poirot, if none of them. Poole replied gently, not alone, Hastings, but 2 together. There was a collective intake of breath. Poirot's gaze shifted between Lady Clarissa and Miss Evelyn. Yes, you were rivals in love and in society, but you were also unified for a brief while. Richard Hone has pitted you against each other for too long. He offered marriage, money, and flight, and at the same time murmured the same promises to the other. Finally, yesterday night, the truth came out. You faced him together. He laughed as usual, but this time you didn't laugh. The revolver was at hand, and the shot was discharged with both of your wills. Evelyn exclaimed, "Oh, that's a lie." But Clarissa's hand suddenly gripped hers, and in that unintentional touch, the truth shined like lightning. Poirot nodded. "How you see, Miss Ame, guilt binds while passion separates. It was not the strength of one woman, but of 2 that brought Richard home to his conclusion. The brandy was poured slowly while you argued, and the cigars burned while Weatherford shouted and left. Then quiet. I heard quiet in the corridor. The silence is one of choice rather than tranquility. Inspector Braddock stepped forward. Do you mean that 2 of them shot him, together? Poirot lifted a finger. No, no. One held the revolver while the other placed it in her hand. One shot, but the other didn't stop her. Complicity. Monsieur Lanceur, a crime committed by 2 people. Rare, but not unknown. Clarissa rose, her arrogant mask shattered. She said, "He made us both look foolish. Promised, lied, and laughed. We couldn't bear it." Evelyn averted her face and sobbed. "I never intended, oh God," Braddock yelled orders. Constables relocated. The women were carried away, one crying and one defiant, bound by their terrible secret. The room was silent. The orchids hung limply. their perfume lingering in the atmosphere. Poirot straightened his tie and gazed around him thoughtfully. "Medius," he explained, "romance is a risky luxury. To one it brings joy. To another, it causes disaster. But sharing it is fatal. Mars played his little game for too long. Finally, 2 women terminated it for him." He bowed as if ending a concert. The gathering was shocked into silence and could only look. As we left the ballroom, I exclaimed, still perplexed, "Poirot, it was incredible. 2 women together. I should not have guessed." Poirot grinned slightly. "No," Hastings replied, "that is why you have me." And so, under the Florida moonlight, we exited the ballroom, leaving behind the aroma of orchids and the ruins of Richard Hone epilogue. Of course, the newspapers went crazy over it. One headline read, "Society Beauties in Palm Beach Tragedy." Another, less sensitive, said, "2 women, 1 revolver." I wondered if poor Hone would have appreciated the scandal, as he had always relished the attention. Inspector Braddock, though initially dubious, eventually admitted Poirot's judgment was correct. He later told me, shaking his head, that he had never seen anything like that. 2 women working together. Palm Beach will be gossiping for 10 years. Lady Clarissa faced her fate with elegance, as if the courtroom were another drawing salon, and she was once again the main attraction. In contrast, Evelyn Hart appeared to be broken by the incident. She confessed with weeping. However, she corroborated Poirot's rationale precisely. The 2 women faced Hone jointly, each expecting him to discard the other, and when he mocked them both, passion escalated to lethal partnership. Clarissa passed her gun to Evelyn, who pulled the trigger. "Strange, Hastings," Poirot said later as we strolled the terrace one last time, "how seldom jealousy unites. Yet it did so briefly, just long enough to kill." And when I inquired, he spread his hands. "Then nature exerts itself." Clarissa, proud, attempted to rationalize. Evelyn, tender, sought to repent. 2 parts of a whole crime. That is why it couldn't stay hidden. I could only marvel. But the cigars, lipstick glass and torn note all pointed elsewhere. I was convinced that Weatherford had done it. Poirot's mustache quivered. "Perhaps it is why he was innocent. Hastings, guilt sneaks up on you. Innocence, it boasts. The cheap cigar, the dispute, and the $10,000, too loud and visible. The real hint was the silence I heard in the corridor. 2 women who are no longer rivals but allies remain silent. We stopped at the balustrade. The Atlantic stretched before us in gleaming indifference. The orchids in the ballroom had long ago been removed, but their fragrance lingered in my thoughts. "Palm Beach will recover," I remarked, seeking levity. "It thrives on scandal." "May we?" Poirot responded. "But some orchids, Hastings, bloom only once, and they bloom in poison." We left the breakers the next day, Poirot as calm as ever. I'm still dazed, and although having seen many cases since, whenever I catch the faint aroma of orchids, I recall the night 2 women set aside rivalry for vengeance, and the morning when Hercule, with his little grey cells, lifted the veil on their lethal pact. Curtis. And so ends Poirot and the Palm Beach Tragedy, a story about orchids and appearances, where the silence after a toast spoke louder than any alibi, and Poirot's small grey cells distinguished between spectacle and reality. We wrote this narrative in homage to Agatha Christie, using inspiration from the true unsolved 1902 murder of Richard Hone in West Palm Beach. Our story is, of course, completely original. If you've listened to the end, you're the reason these mysteries continue.